Those were night creatures, weren't they?
I don't know what they were.
They were night creatures.
Why?
By completion of the first quarter of this season, the audience came in with residual excitement from the original show, had no direction for where this was headed. And as someone who revered the Castlevania show for its direction by adapting the lore of the games that it drew from, other than taking prominent characters from the titles they stem from, Nocturne barely, and I mean barely, followed suit to garner success in the eyes of the returning fanbase. Whether you're a fan of the games, the original animated show, both, or a newcomer, it can't be denied that Nocturne was trying too hard to be hip, and in that process, delivering to us a smorgasbord of confusion. Many of you have been waiting on this retrospective on the show, and I had to make sure it came out with my truest words on it, which resulted in many revisions. But anyway, I hope you got some time on your hands, cause this might be a long one. Castlevania Nocturne. What in the blue hell happened? Load it up. Yo. I'm not the most diehard fan of the Castlevania franchise, but I did do my due diligence in educating myself enough on the main premise of the series to appreciate the presence of Julia, often finding it refreshing when an adaptation can create original characters that enrich an already established lore. In this case, Richter Belmont's mother breaks tradition of Castlevania's stereotypically male-dominated vampire hunting protagonist lineage. She's competent, skilled, nurturing, and although her presence was short-lived due to the orchestrated direction of the show to focus on Richter's trauma, it's apparent that she would have been successful in defeating Olrox, if not for her stubborn-headed son's decision to ignore her directive as an experienced and accomplished vampire hunter, in which such a feat would have anointed her name among a legendary knighthood, to be revered in a long line of Belmonts by defeating a dragon in a new world, a feat yet to take place as the Belmont clan is infamously dedicated to defeating only one dragon repeatedly, the Dracul of Europe. Everyone loves dragons, and that's why I also like the premise of Olrox's revision as the legendary Aztec dragon deity Quetzalcoatl. This is doing great service to the show's directive by connecting the Castlevania universe to the Western Hemisphere. And since Dracula is gone due to the events of Season 2 of the original show, allegedly, it gives leeway to use his powerful underlings that were close in power from the games as vampire lords who will rival his influence in Europe in another setting. I like it, these are good character uses, until 7 minutes into the show, snapping out of fan mode and began putting 2 and 2 together. Now I get it, Olrox is meant to be honorable by allowing a 10-year-old fragile Richter to live until he is strong enough to pose a challenge. It's an attempt at making a unique story progression, but the problem is generic. Again, while this action paints Olrox as noble, adding that the main character of the show is Richter, it's a blatant setup for suicide by increasing the opportunity for his enemy to kill him later, all because he avoided taking care of a loose end, the loose end. For the love of Oshun, it's so predictable that Olrox will meet his end at the hand of Richter at some point in the series. Might not be this season, but it's fated to happen. And if he doesn't die, I guarantee they will turn him into some kind of anti-villain with a redemption arc to propel Richter's character development with the power of forgiveness and overcoming the destructive nature of revenge. But I get it. Richter has to survive somehow for the show to go on. Now fast forward to 10 years later, and Richter the Belmont, not Richter Belmont, that we know from the games. This guy's name is Richter
The Belmont.
Is now all grown up living in the middle of the French Revolution. Richter in the games is a bit confident in his ability as a vampire hunter, no doubt about that, but Richter the Belmont here is just straight up arrogant while dispatching low-tier vampire goons. Thus pops in a new issue with the show's direction, and it doesn't have anything to do with Belmont's arrogance, it's with his speech patterns. Now I overlooked this particular factor in the original show because, you know, they had to start somewhere, but I thought they would have at least made an effort in the sequel to improve on the accents based on the main setting. Nope, even though we're in the heart of France, not one local seems to have the slight French accent. Only person that should be excused in this matter is Richter, since he grew up in an English colony. Not one aristocrat.
Unremittingly dull.
Not one French soldier.
Religious orders need to register with the National Convention.
Not even one of these little girls had a French accent.
And you look as if you have some fight in you.
But yet the only people who seem to express some sort of French accent are the Haitians. At least when they want to pronounce Edward's name, but somehow forget to French it up when saying Saint-Domingue.
Saint-Domingue.
How does everyone native to France in a French colony naturally sound like they're from Britain? Especially Maria, who out of the main entourage was born and raised in France using British slang?
That would be the ungrateful wanker.
A century earlier from its actual prominence in the real world. Not to mention this overusage of this guy's name.
And I'm Edouard.
Edward.
If you're going to English it up the whole time, just say Edward. This is just a small portion of a bigger issue with the show's direction that I'll bring up later. Now, throughout the first episode, I can decisively pick out a few things orchestrated that sat well, beginning with how vampires have infiltrated the upper echelon of human societies. It makes complete sense that they would have power and influence over the lives of humans, other than just in the primal aspect. Because if you are a vampire that's been alive for 200 some odd years and still struggling, your existence is pretty much a failure. But as I said, it makes sense, because most white-collar positions in society don't require individuals to use their hands or be out in the fields. They pretty much bark orders or just be inside, meaning they would not be out in the sunlight majority of the time, resulting in a more lighter skin tone compared to the workers who get darker in the sun. It also makes sense that these individuals would be against the revolutionaries, because it disrupts the status quo that's been in place for however long they've been in power. In the same breath, instigating the opposition to rise up so that they can root out those who plan to rebel, giving them way more incentive to hunt and feed out in the open during the night, specifically when families are inside, so things like secret meetings would take place. Thus, when certain individuals go missing, people will automatically deduce that it's a result of going against those in power, and those brave enough to challenge them met consequences. People like aristocrats, bureaucrats, politicians, and even plantation owners fit this criteria, and it's a bit brilliant, not gonna lie. A great way to exemplify how much higher on the food chain vampires are physically, mentally, politically, and even societally. Is that a word? Oh wow, it actually is, but yeah, it works. And with these two introductions to the show, it just complicated things in more ways people didn't realize. Now, before the representation and inclusion crowd jump to their usual conclusions, I don't have any issues with characters of color or race swapping. My issue lies with the narrative behind these characters and how they are utilized in the world they inhabit, which unfortunately, compared to the previous color cast in the original Castlevania show, specifically beloved characters like Isaac and Greta, the ball was dropped considerably with Annette and Edward. Even started double dribbling in certain instances because it really seemed like they took the essence of fantasy a little too extreme. Since they wanted to insert real world events to mimic a sense of historical fiction, yet the attempt failed. I'm sure you're wondering what I mean by this. Well, for example, in historical fiction, majority of the fictional aspects of the writing has to flow and reflect the historical setting that it takes place in. In this instance, Castlevania Nocturne is taking place in 1793 colonial France, 1 year before the end of the French Revolution. Notice I said colonial France, which means in this time period, European colonization was the trend, resulting in the oppression and enslavement of Americans and Africans. Like England and Spain, France was one of the biggest participants in this whole wave of manifest destiny, and at the time owned the biggest portion of North America called Louisiana, including many areas in the Caribbean, specifically the most profitable land, the Antilles, called Saint-Domingue, or as we know it today, Haiti. If you think transatlantic slavery was bad in English colonies, it was nothing compared to the French and Spanish because they took Darwinism and eugenics to the next level. Which is why when I see this guy here and Annette casually walking about and mingling publicly in France, puzzled me. For one, obviously, Europeans at the time didn't think very highly of people of African descent, and on top of that, those considered or formerly enslaved regardless of class. The French Revolution destabilized the French political hierarchy and economy, so as a result had a residual effect on the stability of their colonies. Thus, their most profitable extension in the New World became susceptible to being overtaken by successful slave revolts, allowing the Haitian Revolution to begin 2 years into the French Revolution. In summary, not only did the French saw lowly of Africans, but were forced to sell Louisiana to the US in order to regain the profits they lost in the repeated attempts to retake Saint-Domingue. Plus, the success of the Haitian Revolution created extra attempt for Haitians in general that still goes on today. And as a Haitian of Arawak and West African descent, I can tell you that Haitians don't really think highly of the French in return. Allegedly. So when I saw Marie giving Annette the opportunity to inspire French citizens with stories of the Haitian plight,
stop the cap!
While we're on the Haitian Revolution, let's make something else very clear about the relationship between Annette and Edward as a product of extreme fictional exaggeration. Most mixed individuals, or known then as the colored class in Haiti, didn't really support the cause and actively supported returning the island to French rule. Product of a French man procreating with an enslaved woman was so prominent that they actually became their own separate class, and the opposite rarely happened. Thus, back in those days, men, held all the power, and thus a colored child, specifically a boy, would grow up upholding the ideals of their father who was European. And this is why someone like Edward would likely be seen in upper echelon spaces of entertainment among the fair and lovely crowd. I'm not saying that there weren't mixed individuals who supported the revolution, but for those who aren't aware of the intricate details of history, the whole happenstance of how Edward and Annette met is highly unlikely and based off pure imagination. The abolitionist movement didn't even begin yet, and I'm supposed to believe that someone of Edward's status would talk back to this white plantation owner and then be okay with sheltering a runaway African. Yeah, okay. In relation to this topic of falsifying history, we can segue into the next horrendous portrayal of African spiritual practices and deities. First and foremost, I must say that I'm glad that an attempt was made to undo the vilification of voodoo and the Loa, while also shedding light on the existence of the Yoruba pantheon, known as the Orisha. Yet, I can't just overlook the amount of inaccuracy and misconceptions presented and allow it to fly, starting with Edward's words in episode 2. Let's unpack this blasphemous conversation. First things first, spirits and deities are two separate categories. Spirits are human souls. For instance, we are spirits embodying the living plane through an avatar of flesh until it serves its purpose and it deteriorates, aka death, which then the spirit returns to the source and reunites with the ancestors. Ogun is a deity, and like most from various pantheons, is a force of nature and thus personifies the aspects of earth, metal, and war. Second, humans do not all descend from gods. This isn't Greek mythology where Zeus thinks with the wrong head and creates bastard demigods all over the place. Humans usually honor a deity that brings them purpose, and thus that group of humans become metaphorically children of said deity. This also grants this group a natural connection to that deity. So this whole I'm descendant of a god from each parent side of the family is blasphemy. You can't just channel an Orisha's power without communing and making offerings in order to be granted their blessing. The only way this could have made sense is if Annette was said to be descended from Shango, who allegedly is said to have been a great warrior king in life that upon death ascended into becoming an Orisha. So if the showrunners actually cared and did the proper research into this spiritual practice, this premise would have worked in their favor. Third, if Annette is connected to an Orisha, then so is Edward since he's of West African descent as well, but I'm guessing he doesn't identify with half of his bloodline since he's been afforded to flourish in colonized privilege. For all the boasting of being descended from Orunmila as well, none of that wisdom peeked through when she let anger get the best of her, which we'll elaborate more on later. Next is concerning the twisting and misuse of Egyptian mythology by associating a vile Hungarian serial killer with the Cometian deity of war, plague, and healing. This is a bit insulting because again, it shows they did not do their research to truly understand certain spiritual systems and how they incorporate it into the direction of the show. Choosing to willfully ignore that Sekhmet is a manifestation of Ra's vengeful power, making her a sun deity. The sun, you know, the main thing that serves as a vampire's ultimate kryptonite. On top of that, not recognizing that one of her labels includes one before whom evil trembles. And then it gets worse. So get this. Drolta
Holla! Know what I'm saying? Who you? Know what I'm saying?
The Messiah's right hand reveals that before becoming a vampire, she was an ancient Egyptian priestess of Sekhmet. Thus, with all of these facts laid out, somehow, someway, they ended up with Ursabet, a child-abducting, serial-killing, pale white vampiress with the blood of an ancient African sun goddess meant to smite evil running through her veins.
That makes absolutely no sense.
And then when she transformed into that werecat vampire hybrid thingamajig,
wait till you see the no.
man, I lost it. Now you know. But regardless of the horrible explanations and usage of these two spiritual systems, they did get something right. For instance, Annette calling out to Papa Leba to communicate with spirits and deepen her connection to her ancestral Orisha in order to gain power over the elements. It was a nice Easter egg to display the main purpose of Papa Leba as the bridge to connect us to the other side when she needed to create a bridge to cross a body of water. Her control over the element of metal and her skill with the blade are phenomenal, and shows that she put in the time to train under the tutelage of her mambo while preparing for the revolution. It translates even better when fighting vampires and night creatures because it's obvious she's specifically drawing out silver to form weapons, to the point of holding her own against Drolta, and it was very impressive. All the fight scenes are great. Richter's skill with the vampire killer and throwing knives is pretty good considering that he didn't have any other Belmonts to train him in the last decade, especially when he regained the ability to use speaker magic and cleverly combined his melee combat with fire and ice magic into the vampire killer whip. Super effective. Marie's unique ability to summon magical beasts to come to her aid translated well into animation and was so beautiful. It was a great sight in the midst of battle, which culminated into this beautiful sequence of both of them fighting Jolta. Thus, the fights and animation are literally part of the minute things in the show that was enjoyable and done with care, because the next topic, unfortunately, is about another disappointment. Almost all, excluding a few couples and situationships, have little to no development or just plainly suck.
Oh no! We suck again!
Specifically, all of Richter's relationships is just weird or non-existent, but we'll dive into that after pointing out some of the good ones. Starting with my favorite, Ulrox and Mizrak. It was a really good example of conflict of interest meets compromise. Having Ulrox, a creature of the night, an enemy of the Christian god by nature, and on the other foot there's Mizrak, a knight's hospitaller and a devout Christian. To top it off, they become involved in a same-sex relationship which goes against extremist belief in the Abrahamic religions such as Christianity. To have a devout warrior monk of the church in bed literally with a monster. It's ironically perfect how they are deceptively using each other to fulfill their carnal desires while masking their intent to gain intel from one another by having philosophical debates. It's the best relationship on the show and continues to prove Castlevania's success in organic LGBT portrayals. Next is Terra and the Abbot, and like the previously mentioned with the last couple, their relationship plays on the same factors of conflict of interest meets compromise. Terra, who is a speaker magician, was involved with a devout man of the cloth. If she can have the Abbot risk it all in having relations with her, almost forsaking his vows to his faith, and in the end result being conceiving Maria, she's certified. Thus, the events of Nocturne put him in a conflicting predicament mirroring Abraham in the Bible. His loyalty is tested again as he must choose between his family and his faith. Last of the good is between Annette and Cecile as teacher and apprentice, by helping her reconnect to her roots in order to be successful in her endeavors, helping her understand her powers and how connecting to her ancestors will help her wield the power bestowed upon her by her guiding deities. On to the bad. Now obviously, in reference to what I stated earlier about the friendship between Annette and Edward does not reflect reality of the time they both lived, especially in the settings that this show take place. Adding onto the fictitious way it played out, from inception, Annette was a horrible and selfish friend. Granted, she wanted to get away from her enslaver, so in the beginning she had to do what she had to do to secure her freedom, even if it meant using an empathetic person like Edward. The man sacrifices his happiness to travel across the Atlantic to help her in her endeavors to find a Belmont, and what does he get in return? Death. On their very first mission to infiltrate the Marquis's private island, you would think that the last thing a person who is supposed to be anointed by a deity of wisdom would use some of that to be wise. Instead, she foolishly lets anger get the best of her when she sees her former enslaver, exposing the party to a gang of vampires and night creatures, leading to Edward ambushed and killed. On top of that, she didn't even try to go back and help him. Even in death, turned into a night creature, Edward is still saving her, and the best she offers in proposition to him in return, again, is the sweet release of death. Wow. Moving on, the relationship Richter had with his mother was cut off pretty early in his life because of Ulrox. Yet, not once in the show, or at least for this season, did they try to incorporate some flashback to the times when she was alive and raising him in the 13 colonies. He's supposed to have a familiar bond with Maria and Terra, but it comes off like an awkward crush triangle, where Maria is supposed to be like a little sister, but their interactions indicate that she's secretly in love with him. Then on the other foot, Terra is supposed to be his mother figure who helped raise and nurture him into adulthood, but there are times when it seems like Richter is secretly enamored with her. It's pretty weird. Speaking of familiar bonds, there's Just and his pointless insertion to the show. I've heard the term deadbeat dad, but now thanks to Just, I can now effectively say deadbeat granddads exist. Now I understand that trauma can affect people in different ways, but to the point that you neglect your family should never be okay. Even worse, letting it residually affect your grandchild? Instead of redeeming himself after ruining the relationship with Julia, his daughter, instead of helping to raise your grandson who had to sell over to France from America alone after witnessing the death of his mother, Julia, instead of properly teaching Richter the family trade to guarantee his safety when facing real threats from the undead, he asks Tara, who already has her own child to raise by herself, to take him in, and he's just going to keep an eye out from the miles away, never introducing himself, until he has a mental breakdown as an adult. Thus, when they finally get together, he tries to convince Richter to give up on overcoming his trauma and continuing the family tradition because he couldn't do better. There's this saying that I know and tends to repeat in my mind concerning this chapter in season 1. It goes, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. So in this case, the student is obviously Richter, and the teacher is obviously Richter? Because other than being pure fan service for those who played Harmony of Dissonance, Juste served zero purpose and was so useless that he was willingly going to watch his grandson die. Not only did he give up on being a vampire hunter, but was not going to try to secure his family's future. Then the most unbelievable scene takes place, as Richter miraculously regains the ability to do magic and takes out the elite vampire hit squad that had them dead to rights. So after 10 years without the ability to practice, along with the fact that the last time Richter was able to do magic, he was firing spurts of weak fireballs. Somehow now, by channeling the power of love and friendship, Richter has turned into peak Cypher. You know, this would have been the perfect opportunity to showcase a flashback of how exactly he was able to perform all these amazing melee-infused speaker magic. Yet instead, the opportunity for us, the audience, to be subjected to even more corny one-liners presents itself.
I was going to say something witty and cutting, but fuck it. I'm much younger than you. That's probably all it is.
I'm impressed.
Coming back full circle is the most bewildering relationship of them all, coupling with Annette, which technically should not be a problem except for the fact that it makes utterly no sense for mainly 2 reasons. 1, there was no concrete development between the both of them throughout the season to rationalize why and how they fell for one another. From the very first hint of them potentially becoming an item was more of a moment where Annette is having a random schoolgirl crush and trying to show off for Richter's attention, which was obviously not reciprocated. It just seems like every waking moment is an opportunity for her to glance and gawk at him for no apparent reason. Then they had a talk about Edward's death, and then after that summarized to, you lost your mom, I know how it feels, it's hard, giving no indication of deeper affection and care. Then it was the incident where Richter gets traumatized mid-battle when seeing Ulrox and leaves everyone behind without concern on whether they can make it out without him. Understandably, Annette is furious at Richter's actions, vanishing for almost 2 days without contact, and then expects a grand welcome when he returns leveling up with speaker magic. You would think that Annette would be untrusting of Richter, whether on his word or on the battlefield, until he rectifies his past actions, right? Nope, she just tells him she understands and she was more concerned than wanted to be. Then they start blushing at one another? This supposed relationship was super rushed and felt more like both of them by episode 7 were just trying to relieve some awkward teenage sexual tension. Now the second reason is, I have to state this again, the showrunners took no consideration for the setting of the show and how it relates to what truly happened in that time period. What true revolutionary, what Frenchman, what Haitian, what former enslaved individual would actually consider falling in love with someone from the demographic who is their enemy and deems their people as less than human? Again, Richter and Annette becoming an item is not a problem. Being of different ethnicities is not the problem. The problem is the mindless inconsideration for who and when these two come together. It perplexed me for a while as to why they would even consider doing such a thing as identity swapping Annette as a Haitian and making her fall in love with Richter in France during the height of colonization. Then it all clicked the moment I started to analyze the direction for the show and all the wacky ways it played out. The time period, Ursabet, the Abbot, Boston, France, Haiti, African spirituality. I could not believe I didn't see it before. These fools are romanticizing revolution and are doing a horrible job by trying to consolidate the idea of rebellion in all of these different avenues. Ulrox is a remnant of indigenous American revolutionary spirit and the survival of colonization. Boston is where the inception of the American Revolutionary War started. Maria being a rebellious teenager and championing the cause of the French Revolution. The Abbot representing the old guard and going as far as to warp his perception, becoming a forge master in order to enforce his faith. Annette, being a rebellious avatar of the deity of war and iron and using it to break the chains of enslavement during the Haitian Revolution. Cecile, and shedding light on African spiritual practices when outsiders demonize what they do not understand. Finally, the vampire messiah herself, who is said to bring about a new age of vampire supremacy by blotting out the sun, their biggest weakness. Trying to highlight messaging of good versus evil, rich versus poor, haves versus have-nots, oppression versus freedom. You get the point. Everything could have worked in tandem if not for the twisting of true accounts in world history that makes these characters and the part they play into these events a contradiction. This whole jambalaya overlay of messaging takes away from the focal point of the series, the battle between vampires and vampire hunters. Fortunately, as this whole thing was going to crash and burn, it took the presence of Alucard, a character from the previous installment, to save the day. Literally, Alucard saved the party from being killed off by Jolta and her goons, while his presence simultaneously saved the audience's vested interest in Nocturne. This is why the showrunners were so confident in greenlighting the follow-up season, because they knew Alucard was a saving grace at the end of the day. If you enjoy the content, please make sure to like the video and subscribe for what's coming down the pipeline. This will help the channel's continued growth in reference to the algorithm. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section, how you felt about Castlevania Nocturne's first season and what you may expect for the second season, what you thought about my perspective and what you have noticed that I didn't. Also, would like to highlight the Patreon members who continue to show support for the content creation on this channel. Check out the links in the description to navigate to the Patreon if you would like to join their ranks. You know the vibes. It's Kaizoku Sleven. Appreciate you.